Welcome everyone to, apologies, to Enough About the Cookie. It's not the end of identity-driven media. We want to label this real talk, real time, no bull. The reason I wanted to do this is most of the webinars that we've seen to date have really been around advertising. What does it mean for the advertiser? How can the advertiser target things? I don't think we've ever had a panel that really took it from a publisher's perspective. So one of the things I've directed all three of our panelists today, which is we have Nathan Thomas, who's Playwire's SVP of Ad Ops Platform and Solutions at Playwire. You know, Playwire a long time, knows more about identity and ad ops than probably anyone I've ever met. We have Scott Ronay, who's a VP of Publisher Development at LiveRamp. And then we have Joanna Burton, Chief Strategy Officer at ID5. So each one of them represents a different segment of the audience makeup or deterministic makeup, what I'll call it, around identity. But if you don't mind, I'd love each of you just to introduce yourselves and give a quick, brief bio of your company, starting with Scott, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jayson. It's great to be here. So LiveRamp, as I think most of the people on this webinar know, is in the business of helping marketers activate their first-party data, right? So we're been entrusted by our marketers to take their CRM data and then match it to online identifiers so that they can target and measure campaigns in digital, right? So that's how we make our money. So as it relates to the publisher community, we're really here to help publishers monetize your authenticated inventory, right? So how we can take your logins as an example and send those logins through the programmatic pipes so you can then make money through programmatic, right? So we help publishers develop and build out your authentication strategies, and we help you guys make more money and ensure that, especially as we talk about the third-party cookie deprecating, that you can continue to make a lot of money in programmatic.
Great, thanks, Scott. Joanna, you mind a quick intro?
Sure, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here. So I'm Joanna Burton. I run strategy at ID5. I've been working at ID5 for a couple of years, and before that I worked at some advertising companies, ad tech companies like SpotX and Rubicon Project and AppNexus, and I've worked for several agencies and publisher side before as well. And it's great to be on this webinar. I think I'm going to bring more of the publisher perspective. So we work with publishers around the world at ID5 to help them prepare for the deprecation of cookies, the third-party cookies in Chrome. Helping publishers see how the audience is performing now in the browsers where cookies are blocked, which I think we'll get onto, and to be prepared and try and sort of take back the power.
Great, thank you so much. I'll do a quick intro of Playwire, and just for transparency purposes, Playwire has no dog in this fight. We're completely agnostic. We want to work with all partners. Our main objective is to help the publisher. We're a publisher-centric company. Everything we do revolves around the publisher. So we look at the landscape out there, every DSP, SSP exchange, really to buy your media as cheap as possible. Playwire sits on the other side of the table where we want the advertiser and anyone getting your demand to pay their fair share. We have an acronym we call RAMP, stands for Revenue Amplification Platform, where really we're demanding more from our partners to get you the most demand possible. So that's Playwire in a nutshell. Nathan, anything you want to add to that?
No, we're, like you said, publisher-centric, publisher-first. Everything we do has to benefit the publisher, and all technologies that we explore are here to benefit ultimately the publisher and make them more money. Awesome.
So those are your panelists. We have over 120 people on thus far, expecting over 200. So let's kick the show off. So the end of third-party cookie. So today we're going to discuss, the issues announced in 2020 where Google ultimately decided to deprecate or say we're going to get rid of third-party cookies. From our perspective, we see four players at the table. One is Google. So if you think about this as a boardroom, it's Google is the chairman of the board. They sit and they kind of navigate and tell us exactly how they're going to do things, but they don't tell us, well, they give us an edict of what they're going to do. They don't tell us how to do it or how to navigate it. The other board members, which are smaller board members, would be the identity companies. You have publishers and advertisers. And it's really our job to determine what Google's going to do. And I don't know how many of you actually work firsthand with Google. I'm sure most of you do, but they'll give an edict of, hey, we're going to do this. And it's really our job to navigate. They don't tell you if it's right or wrong. So there's a lot of gray in this area. And hopefully the conversations today will kind of spell out how people are approaching it in different ways, because there really is no wrong or right answer, right? So each one has their own interpretation. And that's how we're going to approach this today. we've already seen some data that supports a 50 to 70% decrease in CPMs when there's not, when cookies are not allowed. And there's over 80 partners kind of clamoring to figure this whole thing out. So there's a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different players, a lot of different understanding of what this means. So today we're going to cover what does it mean to me as a publisher, what solutions are available or being proposed, and what do I need to know? And the biggest thing is we want questions. So if you look, there's a little Q&A icon at the bottom. Please ask questions through the entire time. We want to answer them. We're going to answer them in real time. This is for you guys. So this is your chance to ask any question you have or want, and we'll do our best to answer them in real time. So with that being said, the first thing we're going to talk about is Google's alternative with their sandbox. And Nathan, I thought you'd walk everyone through, what does flock mean? What does a cohort mean in particular? And what does turtle dove mean?
Yeah, so just before we get into this, obviously, there's been a lot of noise about this in the industry, and we don't want to spend too much time interpreting the Google sandbox. There are a lot of different proposals in there. There's different APIs for fraud and measurement and conversion and trust and remarketing, et cetera, et cetera. But really, this is kind of Google's proposal, the Privacy Sandbox, to how to handle the deprecation of third-party cookies. Again, not to spend too much time on this, but two things I think to take away that are important here, and most of you guys probably have heard about this. So there's this concept of flocks, federated learning of cohorts. So it's really, instead of drilling down on what the individual user is doing, right? So as is traditionally done now, where a user visits a web page and then they go somewhere else, and all of a sudden they're getting retargeted, and that cookie kind of is all over the industry, and different companies are kind of getting their hands on this data. Here, it's really taking that and putting it in the browser on the machine. So creating these cohorts of people that have certain interests. So your people that are on websites about sneakers or music or what have you, and creating these cohorts of interest groups that can then be used for targeting. But again, it sits in the browser. It's not a third-party cookie. It cannot be extracted and kind of sold off and done whatever with it. And the key here is that Google is saying they want to make this indistinguishable from their cohorts, the individuals, so that it cannot be individually identified.
Hey, Nathan, can you explain to everyone what a cohort is, right? So it's a new term. It's being used a lot lately. I think it'd be good for everyone to just understand what exactly is a cohort.
Yeah, so I guess a grouping of individuals on the web that have a similar interest, right? So grouping those individuals into a cohort of, let's say, sneaker enthusiasts, car enthusiasts, or what have you. And then kind of being able to target that as a group, not the individual.
Got it, thanks.
So the one thing I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on is explaining one of the other BIRDS acronym, because I feel like this is more relevant to the publisher, actually. Again, the flocks are really here. How can an advertiser still reach someone with a certain interest? That doesn't really explain what you as a publisher are doing that are trying to run your own ads, for example, on your website, or try to monetize your traffic. And this is really where Turtle Dove comes into play. So it also stands for something: two uncorrelated requests and locally executed decision on victory. It's a mouthful, and it's important to kind of break that down into two pieces. So there's, instead of the normal ad server setup that we have right now, where there's a request to the ad server, and in that ad server is really where the decisioning logic happens in terms of what ad is going to deliver. That is changed in this concept. So you basically have one request that goes to the ad server, and let's say you as a publisher are running your own campaigns. That is kind of the contextual / first party request. You might be doing your own targeting based on either just contextual, let's say sections of your site. This is a sports section, this is the gaming section, what have you. Or you might have your own first party data, right? That first party cookies are still allowed, so you can still do a lot on your own property. That's still okay. But then at the same time, there's a second request that goes out kind of into the programmatic realm, if you will, that is looking for these ads and advertisers that are trying to target on flocks. And again, the auction then happens in the browser, not in the ad server. So it's got,
So that's the big takeaway. Happens in the browser, right? That's the
correct.
big difference. Got it.
It
Awesome.
really moves it into the browser, and it gives the browser obviously a lot of power here in this scenario. So that's something to keep in mind and discuss. And there are other details here, how these requests for flocks don't go out all the time. It's kind of randomized. They strip out data, yada, yada, yada. But these are just two things to take away without taking more time up here.
So there's really three ways of doing things. You got Google's way, right? You got the chairman of the board, which is this flocks or cohorts. But then you have two other methodologies, right? So one is deterministic data, and one is probabilistic data. So from my understanding, both these companies do different things, but I've asked them to speak in a tone from deterministic data for LiveRamp and probabilistic data for ID5. Now, for complete transparency, ID5 does both. However, I've asked Joanna to just talk as if she was doing probabilistic data. So Scott, maybe you can talk like what is deterministic data and how does LiveRamp participate in this?
Yeah, I mean, so from LiveRamp's perspective, again, kind of going back to my earlier comments where we're helping, marketers, match their first party data to the ad tech ecosystem, right? And so the way we think about deterministic data really in terms of publishers is like an email address or a phone number that can be then used to send through the programmatic pipes after it's been encrypted. So it can be then matched to audiences that marketers want to buy on, because marketers want to buy people-based audiences, we've heard. And so we're providing the pipes deterministically to connect a login event that happens at the publisher's site to a marketer's CRM database.
Right. So you're basically taking emails or phone numbers and matching them to some, anonymizing them, right? So they don't know who it is.
Anonymizing them, correct.
Right.
And then sending them through the programmatic pipe. So then that inventory can then be surfaced to marketers.
So we work with over 500 publishers, right? A lot of them don't have a lot of either you have a very small user pool that logs in, or they don't have any user pools that logs in. So if I'm a publisher, how would I best work with a company like you? I mean, should we not work with someone like you? Should we try and figure something out? What are our options around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, so for the most part, what we're seeing is about, I don't know, on average, like a 2 to 10% average authentication rate across all our publishers. We have like 60% of the ComScore 20, 50% of the ComScore 100, and we have about 400 publishers in our network now. All of them have some level of authentication, but they vary from like 2% to like 10%, like I said. But even like a newsletter click through, like if you're sending out email newsletters to your users and they're clicking through to the website, that's considered an authenticated event, right? And that can be used to send through the programmatic pipes. So what we do with our publishers is we help them understand where they're at in terms of authentication rate. We help them understand how much additional CPMs they're getting from that authenticated traffic. And then we can help them build their authentication strategies over time, like doing A/B testing to find out how much, if we ask a user to contribute their email address, does that relate to increases in CPMs, and how much would that potentially contribute to audience loss? And then you can start to test over time about how much that those authentication events are worth to you, and how much it could potentially hurt your business to ask for more authentications. So it's about a balance, right? It's about asking for authentications when it makes sense.
So the big thing is, hey, I know who this user is based on this data. You can tie it to someone, where probabilistic is more taking different signals, matching them together. So with that being said, Joanna, can you tell us a little bit about like what is probabilistic data and how does ID5 use it?
Yeah, so for the purposes of this debate, as you said, Scott, and you, Jayson, there's not everybody logs into a publisher site. So there are publishers that can't command a login. Maybe it's a weather site, maybe it's a gaming site you didn't mean to spend so long on, maybe celebrity gossip, maybe you're checking your download speed. So tons of utility sites, a lot of news sites, some gaming sites, some sites that have really valuable audiences, but they don't want to log in with their email address. They don't want to share their email address for whatever reason, or maybe they're not sharing their email address on this particular login this time right now. So that opens up a huge number of super valuable visitors that maybe you don't need to know who they are, but you need to know one different from another, like A different from B, different from C. So we have a probabilistic algorithm where we infer the identity. So using our algorithm, the behavior of A looks on this site looks very similar to the behavior of A on this other site. So we're going to call that A, except for it's actually a pseudonymous identifier with loads of different letters and numbers in it. But it's a way to be able to address an audience without attaching any data to that individual and being able to get much bigger scale and reach that way.
Great.
Yeah, and I was going to just add in there too, Jayson. Thanks, Joanna. I think I saw a question about what are the incremental CPMs that we're seeing, and we've done a lot of testing, as you can imagine, over the course of the last year, and a perfect place for us to do this testing is in Firefox and Safari, right? They haven't allowed third-party cookies in a long time or any sort of tracking in a long time, and we're seeing what was $1 CPM for contextual targeting in Safari now turn into $3 and $4 CPMs because we're now able to identify those users in those browsers. So basically, it's like all the brands, all the marketers want to buy people-based inventory, and to what extent you can up your game and ask for more authentications where it makes sense, you're going to see 3, 4, 5x return on your investment from a CPM standpoint, and use that in conjunction with the scale story that Joanna's talking about. I think it's really important that we're pursuing both alternatives as we're moving forward in this industry.
Joanna, are you seeing the same lift as well?
Yeah, we're seeing the same lift, but it's more for us around, you made a great point there, Scott. It's around looking to see how audiences behave in these environments now. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to it, but so that instead of just waiting until cookies are deprecated and then we're all left alone, let's look at how the audience behaves now, how different campaigns behave, different buyers, and just learn as much as we can so that publishers, that we work with and that we represent have as much knowledge as possible before it's too late. And also, we have third-party cookies in the other browsers right now. We can look and see how, in our case, how our probabilistic algorithm is performing. How did we do? If we've got third-party cookies, so we can see how did we do on our algorithm. So that's useful. And then I think one of the important points to maybe raise here is, when you have a login strategy, you're asking your users to log in and register or, put in their telephone number or something like that. Not everyone can command that. But under European regulations, I'm based over in Europe, we're a global company, but under our regulations, under the US regulations, that some of the regulations that are coming down the line, you have to ask consumers if you're going to use something like their IP address, because it can be considered personally identifiable data. Right. So I think in every case, the overarching theme of conversations like this is it's time for publishers to get closer to your users, be it whether you're asking them for an email address or whether you're asking to monitor traffic patterns without knowing where they live or anything like that. You just want to look at how A is behaving on different days at different times, but the more you can have a dialogue, the better.
Hey, do you mind if I pipe in one more time, Jayson?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about what Joanna just said within the context of making sure that there's clear choice and there's clear an understanding about how consumers' data is being used right now. So and that's kind of what getting back to the flock discussion, right? And one of the reasons why Brave, the browser, decided to take, to eliminate flock from their infrastructure is because they feel like it's not an easy thing for consumers to understand. There's not an easy way to opt out. Like we have to, when we ask for users' data, we have to let them know exactly what's happening, and we have to make sure that they can that we can honor their opt out or honor their choices of consent. Because if we don't, we're going to have situations like we do now where these identifiers are just going to go away. So we have to just do it the right way, and so we can make sure we maintain the trust of the consumers as they're going through the open internet.
Yeah, I absolutely concur. We have to have a dialogue with users. We have to maintain the trust. We've got to respect them, because ultimately this is about having a more sustainable industry.
Right.
And that means
there's a lot of good questions I want to get to. So people asking a bunch, and then we have to cover. So one really great question is, I presume Google's proposal only applies to Chrome and Android users. So that's a great question, right? Does this apply universal to every browser? I'd love someone to jump in on that one.
I answered that in the chat, but happy to help here. again. So basically, this is a Google proposal. This is for Chrome and Google products, if you will. So any browser out there is technically able to do whatever that browser wants, right? In the long run. So that's what we basically seen already, right? We have Firefox and Safari that are already restricting or blocking third-party cookies completely way before Chrome even did. And as Scott just mentioned, Brave came out saying, we don't think Flock is a privacy-friendly solution to even use. So the industry is definitely going through a lot of changes, and it remains to be seen how the different actors interpret this.
Got it. This one's a tough one. I'm not even sure to answer this. In Flock, spec cohort examples look 43p Wi-Fi. Any idea how demand will know how to translate it or what to target?
I mean, I guess we're all not sitting on Google's side, so we can't really know yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we're gonna keep moving then. So, what are the things that are gonna be affected, right, when Flock rolls out? How is this gonna affect all of us, right? So, one, audience activation and retargeting is gonna go away. Frequency capping. So, how do we know how many ads to show each person? 1, 2, 3, geo, by country, by website. Media attribution will stop. Insights and segmentation will stop. If you're using third-party data for site personalization, that's all going to stop. So some of the questions I want to ask the group are, if I have a DMP, a data management platform, will it still work in this new world?
I mean, I'll speak from a LiveRamp perspective. I think, once the third-party cookie goes away and how DMPs were using that cookie to track users, it's going to break, right? But we need to find a way to capture authentications and then use those IDs. And there's ways that LiveRamp can help there as well, to use those IDs to track behavior across site and across domain, as long as the user is consented. That's really the way that we can continue to monitor and track and utilize DMPs in the future.
You're muted, Joanna.
I'd say the same. So yeah, absolutely. Once the third-party cookies have gone away in Chrome, have been deprecated by Chrome, whenever that is, we're all just waiting to find out when that's going to happen. Yeah, it will have an impact on targeting if the publishers and the advertisers and their agencies haven't tried the alternative solutions like working with LiveRamp or ID5 or the other options that there are in the market. But for things like frequency capping and for retargeting, you don't actually need to know that, you don't need to know the user. You don't need to use the DMP for those quite simple use cases.
So DMPs most likely are not going to have a place in the future as we see it around digital media. Interesting. So a lot of us have spent years building up relationships and contracts with all the SSPs, DSPs. Will that be affected moving forward? Right? Is there things that we need to do to plan, or any technology that we need to implement?
It's interesting. From LiveRamp's perspective, we've been, ever since Safari eliminated the third-party cookie or their cookie tracking mechanism back in 2017, I think it was, we've been working with all of the ecosystem partners, all the DSPs, all the SSPs to embed the LiveRamp ID inside of their workflows. So the great thing about ATS, without being too much of a shameless plugger, you utilize, the publisher utilizes ATS, and then we take care of the rest. In other words, you can service your inventory to whatever SSP partner you guys work with, right? And then those SSP partners have the ability to transact with all the DSPs that we have. So we've got 25 SSPs in our network, more than 25 SSPs in our network exiting Q4. We've got about 45 DSPs in our network. So the beauty of it is the whole infrastructure is built to be able to send your authenticated traffic through the programmatic pipes. And so all those same connections will still work from a LiveRamp perspective.
And ATS means what?
Sorry, authenticated traffic solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then I'm assuming the same thing applies to ID5, correct?
Yeah, the same thing applies, although I think we're more built out. We're more of a publisher side solution. So we're working with more SSPs than DSPs right now. The DSPs is the final part of the puzzle. And it's as simple as the publisher creates the ID, and then that's passed through the supply side to the demand side, to the demand management platform or the demand side platform.
And Joanna, what about like ad servers? So most of us use GAM, right? But then there's also people that use SpotX or Rubicon or Magnite or Magex, whatever they're called these days. How does that play into this? Or there's really nothing we need to do. These guys are all taking the steps necessary to make it work.
Yeah, they're all taking the steps. It's really on us and myself and on LiveRamp and the other identifiers to make that work for the publisher.
Got it.
Yeah, we're really close to launching our integration with GAM. From a CTV standpoint, the programmatic pipes are about halfway built. We're working, and we should be deploying lots of SSP partnerships on the CTV side as well here soon within the Q2.
Right.
So wheels are in motion there for sure.
Nathan, from your perspective, and by the way, for the group and everyone here, I asked Nathan to take this perspective from Google, as if he sat in the Google table. He does not, for transparency purposes. He's a Playwire employee, but for this conversation, he will. Is there any differences that are going to happen on the ad server level for GAM? So, hey, I use GAM to manage all my connections and my decision engineering. How will that change?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes back a little bit to the whole turtle dove concept earlier, where that auction is going to happen in the browser. Again, still pretty light on details on how exactly that ties into GAM. We're remain to be seen, basically. However, what Playwire is already doing on the GAM side is we're already taking advantage of first-party IDs and are already passing that into GAM, because that is a capability that exists now. And you can basically utilize that to do simple things like just frequency cap across domains in browsers like Safari or Firefox. Some may not realize that, Google GAM right now, if you set a frequency cap in Safari, it's capping that on that single domain on that user. It does not know when that user goes to another domain. That's already happening now. So we're working with ways to address this, and also a lot more first-party data, which we can speak about later, that is not cookie-based, that we are already passing into GAM.
And I have actually a great question from one of the audience here. So is this moving the header bidding back to browsers instead of server to server?
Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, there's obviously already server-side header bidding going on, but even there, still very cookie-based. So it really is moving that back to the page. Everything is happening on page. The decisioning logic is happening there, and even the header bidders, once cookies go away, they, as we've been discussing here, they're going to need to find other ways to know what users to bid on, right? And how much, and that's where solutions like LiveRamp and ID5 come into play.
Right. So when you look at the spectrum of browsers, right? So you got Safari, prevents domains to drop third-party cookies. You've got Firefox, and doing this for a while, and then starting February 20th, third-party cookies. So how will cross-device, across browsers work? Will they work at all, right? So if I'm a publisher, I own one website, 10 websites. So I'm the owner, but from my understanding, and by the way, just for transparency purposes, we're just as confused about this as everyone else is. So take it with a grain of salt. I own multiple websites. Can I target across all my websites, or is it uniquely dependent per URL? I think that's a really big question that everyone wants to know about.
I think that's a great question, because there are some IDs that only work with the publisher that's dropped their IDs. They only work within the walled gardens of that individual publisher. So an ID solution like ours, like both of us on this call, works across multiple different websites, so that you can frequency cap across not just all the Playwire publishers, but all the publishers in the US or all the publishers around the world. So yeah, you need to be able to do multiple, to be able to frequency cap, to be able to retarget across multiple sites.
So I have a site, someone signs into and they accept on XYZ, I want to, use deterministic data, or wherever it may be. You're saying you can then apply those same principles and targeting to all the websites under the portfolio that I either manage or own.
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak specifically for ID5 and then let you do your bit, Scott. But so what we're asking is publishers that work with us, they create the ID and store it in a first-party cookie. So this is not blocked by the browsers right now, and it won't be blocked when the third-party cookies are deprecated in Chrome. And that means that we can link those first-party cookies. And they're passed, as I said before, through the SSP to the demand side. So that's our way of working across multiple domains.
So is this your, again, I don't mean to ask hard questions. Is this your interpretation, or have you gotten approval from Google? Like, hey, we're going to allow this, right? So as much as we all want things, that we've seen this all the time, like, hey, here's our interpretation. Google, like, that's great. No, you're, either take it down or we're going to shut you down.
So we think that publishers will always have access to the signals that publishers need to be able to operate their business. So they need to be able to have access for IP address, to be able to do things like geofencing, for fraud, for management. The publisher's the first party in this case, and the publisher's creating the ID and storing the ID, and then we're linking those IDs.
That's right. I mean, it's basically the same framework from LiveRamp's perspective. Now, as we're talking about just the publishers trying to monetize their users in programmatic, every single website, every single domain will call the ATS JavaScript as an example, and surface that inventory to buyers, and then the transaction will happen, and that happens on a domain specific and app and platform specific structure, right? So when we're talking about being able to link users across domains using the publisher's first party strategy, that's something that we can obviously help with. And then in terms of monetizing users in programmatic, each domain you'll need to have an authentication events with each domain that you have.
This one, I'd like just point that one out again, because sometimes I know from our own publishers what I've heard that creates confusion sometimes. So if a user creates this authentication event, which is essentially a login or a login on website A,
Yeah.
that user isn't automatically identified on website B. He has to log in there again, and that ID is kind of generated, and then it can be matched. Where that on the LiveRamp side, whereas on ID5 side, you're using other signals. So based on the signals that you're interpreting, you might already have identified that this is the same user and stored it in the first party cookie. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is, with one important thing to note, and that's that the user has to either not opt out in the US and not opt out with a do not sell signal, or actively opt in Europe. So it's no good if they've only opted in on one publisher site and not another. We would never share the ID if in Europe there was only an active opt-in on one side, or if in the US there was an active opt-out, we wouldn't share it across the different sites.
Very good point. Yeah.
So the big question has come up as well is, are there do the same principles apply to mobile and desktop? In particular, I know Apple came out with an update recently on their SK ad network that if you don't implement their app transparency and tracking framework, or ATT, and then your tracking won't work. And what does that mean? CPIs won't work, CPAs won't work. You won't know where traffic's coming from. Do your solutions work in app? Because from my understanding, this is going to happen any minute now with Apple.
Yeah. Go ahead.
After you. Well, I'm just going to say same point applies. So if the user hasn't actively opted in Europe, or if they have opted out in the US, whilst the technology works, it's a legal issue. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, we're working with our app, publishers. They get a login event. They can activate through the programmatic pipes via the SSPs and all the buyers that we have set up in our ecosystem. It's great, but then at the same time, Apple's got their own interpretations of how they want things to work, and it's in many cases hard for us to understand exactly what the intent is behind some of these policies. So, but what I can tell you is that it works the same from our perspective.
Got it.
Maybe if I may, I'll throw back a question from our participants here for you guys, and I think it's a good one because I sometimes think about it as well. And he kind of wrote here, what is the actual difference between it being a third-party cookie and now we just call it an ID and it's floating around?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I guess the third-party cookie, from my standpoint, allows for cross-domain tracking. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of history here, back in the day when we first started LiveRamp, we would go to publishers and ask for their authenticated traffic, and they would send us third-party cookies tied to email addresses. And that really set at the foundation of how we built our mesh network. So that's all going away, right? And so now when we ask for an authentication, we send it through the ATS JavaScript tag, and we send it down through the programmatic pipes, but we store it in the first party cookie. And then when we respond, we can deliver that impression back through the SSP. And it doesn't require obviously the third party cookie, but it's not necessarily floating around. It's all encrypted. It's all sent through the programmatic pipes through the ATS JavaScript. And but it's not, I guess, floating around if that's the question.
And I think that you know, the important thing is who's setting the cookie, right? So if it's the publisher themselves setting the cookie, then it's very different rules from a third-party cookie,
Right.
which is what's going to be blocked and is blocked by some of the browsers now.
I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe to expand on this, right now, really anybody can drop cookies at all times, basically, and then do whatever with it. And that is something that is changing, and that's something that is not happening with these new IT solutions that you guys have.
Absolutely. So at the moment, the regulations rely on people being good citizens and following the regulations. What we're trying to do is actually enforce the regulation. So you brought up a good point, Scott. We're separating identity and data at ID5 and just passing a pseudonymous ID in the bid stream. There's no data attached to it, and it is encrypted, which means that we will only allow people who have the right to decrypt that in contract to be able to decrypt it. So
That's
other
right.
people can see the IDs there, they can see there's something there, but it's not useful to them. They can't decrypt it if they don't have the right to do so.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, you know, the way in which the ID gets sent from the publisher to the SSP first and then to the DSP, at every step of the way, we have a level of encryption. And so once the ID gets to the DSP, as an example, there's no way that they can understand that that particular user is another user from another publisher or another user from another, from another domain. It's just not possible for them to decrypt that. And so there's no data leakage or data leakage through that infrastructure here.
So basically the data collected on my website can only be used on my website.
That's right.
If that data will not be taken, then meaning you're not collecting this huge data pool of users and then saying, hey, advertise, you can now retarget anywhere you want on the backs of the publishers. You're saying, hey, the users you get are your users.
That's right.
That's accurate.
That's right.
Joanna, you as well?
Yeah, so your readers, your viewers, your gamers, they're yours, and you should keep the data about them.
Great.
But you do need for advertisers to be able to run retargeting campaigns or to be able to look for a specific target audience or to be able to attribute, but they don't need the data that you hold to be able to do that.
Got it. And what about companies like Playwire, right? So we represent, again, a few hundred websites. We're tags on page. We, for lack of a better word, own the real estate. We're helping these publishers manage their advertising and get the most they can. How are we looked at, right? So let's put ourselves on the line and say, from an ID5 or a LiveRamp, are we first party or are we third party, right?
First.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good answer. That was not a setup, everyone. I promise you. Awesome. So a big conversation point is, the big three, right? Google, Facebook. What's the third one?
Amazon, maybe.
Amazon. Thank you.
Yeah.
And they make up only 50% of the addressable market, right? The TAM. However, they command 76% of all media spend. So is this just going to help these guys? I mean, how are we combating this? How are we able to participate and give a better experience for the advertiser?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, the thing that we're really concerned about, right, when the Chrome cookie goes away, like just say it's next January, right, is that all the marketers, because they're so used to wanting to buy people-based inventory, they're going to take their money and go back to them because they know it works. They can measure it. They can do cross-platform, cross-device targeting in the walled gardens. And so, like, we need to do all we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. That we have the open internet be as competitive as we can with the walled gardens, because I see this this framework starting to shift in their favor again. I mean, we all know, I think, that the reason that Google is deprecating this is not because they're trying to do what's right for the industry. Like, in my opinion, maybe I'm saying something controversial, but they're doing it because they want to bolster their position as a walled garden, right? And so we want to work with all the publishers to make sure that that doesn't happen. The scales don't shift even further in their favor.
Yeah, I would agree with that, right? So the walled gardens are still going to use tracking within their own sites and think about all the data they have from search to social, who I'm friends with, where I am, the maps. There's so much information there. I worry about independent publishers and their ability to be able to continue to get their fair share of revenue after the Chrome has deprecated third-party cookies.
I mean, we saw this story essentially play out with GDPR already, where it didn't really affect the big guys because they always get the login,
Right.
and now it's just another one. We do have a lot of questions here from the panel, from the participants here. So I'm going to ask some here to you guys. This is for Scott and Joanna. Do you consider SSO solutions helpful to enlarge the database? Have you joined Swan or any other?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go first, John, if you don't mind. I mean, I think this is genius. I mean, ultimately, like if the publishers just kind of go back and they throw a Facebook or Google or Apple login into your user experience, like you're kind of just helping the walled gardens here. Like you should go out and look at SSO solutions so you can make the user login experience super easy. But at the same time, this is your data. This is your first party data. This is not data that, like, in my view, like you should be sharing with the walled gardens. I know it's easy for users to use that, right? But at the same time, like we should be thinking about like, doing what's right and what's most advantageous to you guys through. And SSO solutions are a really good option.
Yeah, I think just make it easy to collect your user data in a way that works for them. So maybe that is you're just asking for permission to use the IP address for tracking, or maybe you're asking for more information and there's, you probably could speak more to, as a publisher, like good ways to do that. It's different from, in the past when your magazine would be in the newsstand and you had literally no relationship with your consumer. All marketing wisdom, business wisdom suggests that you should build the relationship directly with your users when you can.
Got it. I have a question. So, do you think some of the technologies or other companies are kind of turning their back on Google? So, for argument's sake, have you guys heard of Brave, the ad server that really identifies not allowing any target, right? They're user friendly, very, that's kind of their mantra. They're removing Flock from their ads from being allowed to be used at all because they don't feel it works within their framework. What's your take on that? That's a big move by those guys, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like we go back to the whole notion of wanting to make sure that we restore trust with the consumers. Like I just feel like it's just like a situation where consumers feel like they don't know how their data is being used. And people see that's what's going to end up happening, and then the open internet suddenly becomes a place where people don't want to go or share their data, and then it's hard for people to monetize their audiences. I mean, we all know the internet needs to be ad supported. The free internet needs to be ad supported, and the more we make the users skeptical of what's happening, the worse off we're going to be. And I think this Brave move is an example of that, where they're saying, users just don't understand it and they're not going to trust it, and so we're going to back away from it.
Do you see users, for lack of a better word, flocking to this new browser? I mean, I can remember when browsers first came out, Netscape Navigator was king of the hill, and they are just gone, right? How many of these are happening? So it's possible. What's your thoughts on that? Anyone, Nathan?
I mean, I think the privacy and regulations really in the online industry has really been just a hot topic over the last years, and it's just getting stronger and stronger, where the different privacy law, GDPR, CCPA, then also just users, like, what is happening to my data? What is happening when I browse? And I feel like they are to a certain extent waking up and maybe want to be more engaged and know what is going on and what I'm signing up for or giving away in exchange for free content, right? Because that's the other part of the puzzle. I mean, publishers could just charge for everything and then we don't need ads, but that's not going to happen.
But yeah.
nor is the consumer going to be willing to do that. So that's why it's imperative to make sure that they understand in a way what they are getting for accessing this and what they have to supply.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the point of this whole notion of a trusted value exchange, right? That like the consumers, trust the publishers that they're going to use their data in the right way, and that they have the option of opting out. And in exchange for them sharing their data, they're going to get something, i.e., content that they are compelled to read or want to engage or with or consume. And then in exchange for for that trusted relationship where they've shared data, the marketers can then extend their experiences to via advertising through the publishers to the consumers. And so there's this whole flywheel of a trusted ecosystem that we're trying to build, so people feel comfortable and that the ad-supported part of the open internet can be sustained.
Right. So there's a new term, new acronym that we all have to learn called CDP, which is Customer Data Platform. That's what Playwire is working on. As I said early on in the beginning, we don't really have a dog in this fight. Our actual goal is to work with everybody. From my understanding, I think, Nathan, I'm going to quote you, no one has more than 8% market share in this industry. Is that correct, Nathan?
That's correct.
So the goal really is, you have to work with someone who does email hashing. You have to work with someone who does predictive data. You have to work with all these different partners to really get as much market share as humanly possible. So Joanna and Scott, if someone was to say, what's a good takeaway from this conversation, what should I, as a publisher, be doing right now to make sure I'm ready for this thing's going to happen in 2022? And to follow up on that, do you actually think it's really going to happen?
So I definitely think it's going to
date.
happen.
What?
Oh, look, that's half the problem here, Jayson, right? So we're all waiting to see if and when it happens, and we're all in the hands of a powerful internet company, one of the, the ad tech giants. So, and it can taint the whole online advertising business. So I do think it will happen. And I think I would urge publishers to do a few things. One, work with Playwire. Two, look to see how much of your traffic now as a publisher is in the walled gardens or in the browsers where cookies are already blocked, and see if you can, to Scott's point, make more money from that traffic right now. Look to address them using various different identifiers that are available to see how the traffic is performing and how campaigns perform, and if you can make more money, and look to predict how your audience will be when the third-party cookies are removed in Chrome. And then another thing I would really recommend, like maybe you want to talk about it a bit more, Scott, is build this first-party relationship, as we mentioned before, and then also participate actively in your industry body, because you kind of need to come together collectively to be able to have a compelling voice for the walled gardens to listen, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, from my standpoint, like we work, we obviously love the relationship we have with Playwire. I think what we've found, especially in the early days of us talking about authenticated traffic solution and ATS with LiveRamp, is that a lot of publishers just like, I didn't have a first party data strategy at all, and now I need to have one, right? And so I need to work with somebody to be able to hit the easy button and be able to turn on a customer data platform, because I want to not only leverage that first party data that I'm asking for and use it in a responsible way, but also, monetize it through programmatic. I mean, I think these things just need to happen as a publisher community.
And from publishers' perspective, Playwire's perspective, that's kind of what we're doing. We're working with all these third parties, LiveRamp, ID5 are two of our largest ones, but we are working with others to get as much market share as possible, so we can address this down the road. And it's a lot of contracts, and that's Nathan's main objective this year, is to figure this out and give us a solution.
Yeah, and really just to add on there, just, we obviously are looking for a lot of signals that are not cookie based, right? And some of the integrations we have, we know what game you're playing, how long you're playing, other things like that we pass in as key values or other ways that they're not cookie based. So we're actively doing that besides working with the likes of, ID5 and LiveRamp.
So I know there's a lot of questions that are left over, Nathan, if you want to kind of.
Yeah, I'll jump through here. There's really, really good questions coming in. I hope we can get through all these. I'm just going to start here. This very specific one here. Maybe Scott can answer this. Is there a way for demand side to bid against UIDs in the US with active consent? Yes, I'm okay with using my email to target ads versus passive privacy policy consent for legacy emails collected in the past? In other words, since global TCF doesn't exist yet, is there a new consent signal sent alongside UID so buyers can distinguish the active and passive consent?
The
hard one.
So I think what I'm hearing the question is like, to what, like how long does the consent last for a particular user across borders? Is that?
Or maybe, I guess, if you already have emails in the past that you have collected, what do you need to do now? Is that, can you pass those along? Do you need to ask them for their consent again?
Yeah, I mean, so okay, I think I understand the question. Okay, so what ends up happening with our publisher partners is that once they want to be able to use like UID or ATS or whatever, whatever solution they want, we would review the privacy policies in each country that we support, and then look at the workflow specifically and be able to make a recommendation about whether or not this one in particular complies with local laws, right? So it may look different in each different scenario, but we would walk through that with you guys to understand, where it works and where it needs to be shored up and where it needs to change a little bit. So it's hard to give a across the board answer for this, but we see this all the time with our publishers, and we have the infrastructure in place to deal with it and make sure that we're doing it in compliance with local laws.
I'd say the same. So when you set up the transparency and consent framework, you can say how often you want it to check that you have consent to use that email address. So maybe you could set it for 30 days or 90 days. And there's various different, it's not just the GDPR, it's the Personal Electronic Communications Act here as well. Right. So you need to ensure that you have the up-to-date consent.
I think this is another one that's relevant here question-wise. Again, going back to what can a publisher do? Like we said, that users aren't really sure what they're opting into, what this value exchange is, what I'm giving away to get the content. So how can publishers more effectively build trusted relationships with users so that they are more inclined to opt in and provide value?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And one of the things that we do with our publishers, especially ones that have an existing authentication strategy, is help them develop the journey about how to communicate via pop-ups, or maybe via email, or via the privacy policy that's right in front of the user, about like why we're asking for the data and what we're going to do with it, and just make sure that we're reminding them that we need to use this data because we want to provide a better experience for you guys, and here's a click-through link for you to understand exactly how to opt out and what's involved. So I think it's just being very forward and very upfront with the communication about what the policy is and how data is being used is kind of the baseline answer. But it kind of would depend on at what point during the customer experience you want to be able to communicate different things. And it could look very different, based on where your auth strategy is, currently, and where you want it to go in the future. It's not really a great answer, but it's kind of like, it kind of depends, I guess, is the point.
Yeah. And in Europe, depending on the different countries' interpretation of the regulations, you actually can't restrict access to content if the user doesn't consent to providing their details. So absolutely, you need to be able to enforce or fully explain the value exchange. But then I'd say at the same time, to not be able to frequency cap effectively or run other optimization effectively actually gives a less good user experience.
Mm-hmm.
You expect the impact to be worse in the EU traffic compared to US, considering the extra privacy rules?
What the impact of Google deprecating the third-party cookie? I actually don't. I feel like that we kind of, in Europe, we had to adapt to the regulations a few years ago, and we have, like many publishers have and many advertisers have. And I think that I've seen many publishers lean in to working with ID5 or other identity solutions over the past, definitely the past 9 months. And now it's on the advertisers. Now we're seeing more and more advertisers ask questions, but I think because a lot of advertisers in Europe have already had to adapt, they're a bit ahead. It's like the gold standards, like the Iron Man of identity of regulations, and now more regulations are coming.
Yeah, we have another. I'm going to go jump to one more question by a longtime partner, Jordan Greer. Wow. Will content be king again? And contextual advertising, you know, are we going back in time in a time warp? Is that the new norm?
I think contextual, there'll always be a place. If somebody hasn't given their consent, either with authenticated solution or via saying they're okay with you tracking them with the IP address or the time, then there'll always be a place for contextual targeting on the traffic that has not consented.
Absolutely agree. 100%.
Yes, I actually have a quick. I'm going to keep banging out question. Hope you don't mind here. So, can social followers and push subscribers be used as first-party data yet?
Push support. What is? I don't know if I understand that. Push.
I guess a push subscriber. I guess if someone, I guess you can opt in to get like notifications on a website. Like, hey, send me information about like an article. I think.
Yeah, I think you know, from our perspective, if there's a way to embed like a piece of PII, whether it's a phone number or an email address, in a link that gets back to the website that then can be used to fire off the ATS call,
Right.
then that would be considered an authenticated user.
Awesome. Okay. We're almost at the hour, so right before we leave, I'm just give one shameless plug for Playwire, which is we're launching our Playwire ramp product for app. So if you're making an app, you have an app, you know, we're working with this is the first time ever one SDK for direct header bidding, all mediation partners, all in one scenario. So here it is. You can always ask us about that. We really appreciate you guys taking an hour out of your time. I want to really thank ID5 and LiveRamp for participating. They're a great partner of ours. We can't wait to see what we do in the future. We thank all our publisher partners. Without you, we would not be here. And we work tirelessly for you day in and day out, and we'll continue to do so. So thank you guys for your time. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions afterwards, for anyone, for Scott, for myself, for Nathan, for Joanne, email us. We will get them to the right party. We will get you an answer. So thank you very, very much. And anything else anybody wants to say?